Then I have to adjust accordingly.
Sounds like a drinking problem now.
Well, was that plan I sent out yesterday, Dave, as far as how to proceed through everything today? Was that acceptable? My email? Didn't see it.
I think I hear you now.
Geez, I hope.
I never seen an email from you.
Yeah, because I had the. Is it working?
John's in the waiting room.
That's Ed, 783.
Could be. He's not here then.
Morning, John.
Nobody had surgery last week.
Hey, John, I've got something that's come up. I'm gonna have to leave about 8:45. If we're not done, will you take over from there?
Yeah, I gotta leave by 9 myself. Well,
Bill?
Well, good thing we're starting.
Bill, can you hear me? Since you're the head of the Energy Committee, if we have to run, can you finish the meeting for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
You gonna vote to give us all raises, Bill?
Never leave a meeting early.
Dave at congressslabs.com, right? Says it went. Who knows?
I might have been clicking and just J delete.
I get that a lot. Or at least to the spam folder.
Danger in Buckley, he's Borlex, I think.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple folk Borlex join us, maybe some others from my ag council too, so.
Well, the guy praised it.
There's Katie's notorious picture. So I was smiling.
I don't think I've ever seen it. But there's qualifications.
Hi, Elizabeth.
The application, yeah.
So,
well, they're probably right in that.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing okay.
Good. We've got all types of tough questions for you. Not to put you in the hot seat or any pressure or anything like that, so.
Have to share observations.
There you go. I'm Jay Madison, by the way. I just realized the screen says Marshall Weir for us, so.
Yeah, I'll change that.
Well.
We're afraid if people saw your name, they'd hang up.
Man.
Pick on Jay Day.
It's always.
Must be Thursday.
Yeah.
We're gonna get going in a minute. We're just trying to get everybody checked in that's in the waiting room.
Dave, so what I had sent was the suggestion. Elizabeth and I had communicated yesterday, want to do this more as a conversation format than a presentation format. So I thought if you want to turn it over to me, I can introduce Elizabeth and then start asking questions and invite the board to follow from there, if that's okay.
I'm gonna open it up to the public for.
Oh, yeah.
comments first, if-
I mean, with the Elizabeth
Yeah.
portion.
No, that's fine. And there's Lisa. Bob, probably Bob Hagan, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice crowd today.
Yeah.
about agriculture. It's popular, of
Yeah.
course. It's a quiet crowd.
How are
Any
ya?
more plans for food trucks?
Good morning, Bob.
Good
Not
morning.
at this point, not any big ones. Kathy has been doing some small ones. She's focused more on getting food to the individual pantries
Yeah.
than,
Okay, let's get started. We're gonna stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So everyone that's on Zoom, we have names up there, so you'll see who's who. For the conference room, let's go around, we're gonna introduce ourselves so everyone knows who's here. I'm Dave Converse, I'm chairman of the JCIDA.
Dave Zenbeck, the CEO.
Rob Aiken, I'm on the LDC board.
Lyle Eaton, JCIDA, LDC, whoever.
Peggy Sampson, staff member.
Jay Madison, agricultural coordinator.
Marshall Weir, deputy CEO.
Thanks, guys. So today is a special meeting of the JCIDA board. We have one item on the meeting, and it's more of an informational gathering meeting to look at the impacts of solar projects on prime farmland. With that, I understand we have a couple people that would like to address the board. So I'm gonna open up the floor to a public hearing. So if you have comments, we have a large crowd today, so if we can keep it as quick as possible. I have Darren from Borlex. Is Darren with us?
I am, yep.
Oh, sorry. Over. I see
Can
you.
you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for affording us the opportunity to address you for a very short period of time, sorry. I don't want that. So just to introduce ourselves again, it's been certainly a little bit of a break in terms of our discussions. I think that COVID has certainly made things more challenging in a variety of different ways. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss. What I wanted to basically say is that I'm Terrence Forrest, I'm with Borlex, and Buckley, also with Borlex, are on the call today. We're in the Jefferson County, we're working on two projects in particular. We have a 120 megawatt Greens Corners project, a solar project, utility scale solar project in the town of Hounsfield and in the town of Watertown. And we're also developing a 20 megawatt project in Sandy Creek and Hattersville. And just for those that don't know who Borlex is actually, we're an owner operator of renewable energy projects. We've been in New York State for the last 20 years. And we actually have a hydro facility that's not that far, so in Potsdam. We see ourselves as an owner operator. Part of it is to, quite honestly, to connect with the community, make sure that we're connecting in a variety of different ways, and make sure that we have those relationships because we're going to have long-term relationships. So we appreciate, quite honestly, the work that you do to advance the economic interests of the county as a whole, ensure that there is economic growth, that there is opportunity for all of us. But in particular, in this area, in this community, very clear that we see part of our job is actually to integrate our project into and integrate what we're doing into the ag community. We realize that may not seem on the face of it so apparent how that process moves forward and how that can work. But we truly believe after some of the research we've done, some of the additional work we've done, and we think there's more to be done, that we can actually integrate well into the community. Obviously, direct support in terms of lease payments to the farmers there. And also between our panel an opportunity for us to grow crops that actually help to support the area. We appreciate basically the willingness, your continued willingness to talk with us. When we see today really is an opportunity, we want to sort of connect with you now to express our continued willingness to engage with you in the development of any policies or otherwise. It really sort of drive good outcomes. And we think the good outcomes that we should be looking for are those that really do address what we're hearing from the community, which is a desire to basically take a balanced land use issue. We certainly hear of a desire to improve the financial viability of farm operations in the county and the businesses that support those operations. Those are not excluded, they're not the same. We're also concerned regarding competition for access to resources. We hear specific concerns from the dairy industry because the county is almost 80% of the cash sales, dairy sales. We certainly do hear a desire to drive development of really research facilities. We hear a strong input from the community that also protects private property rights. We hear, behaviors recently saw a article that presents a potential real concern about a wave of projects. We're glad to address each and sort of every aspect of those. Some of those are true concerns that can be addressed. Some, I think, through some explanations can actually be mitigated. So we sort of take this opportunity to say we're glad to be engaged, we're willing to very much to have open discussions about how we're making our choices and how we can sort of together we can work on driving choices which are good for the community as a whole. We look at those as sort of making sure we're driving choices at the right time. So we're adopting policies and procedures. We're doing it in such a way in which all of us can change our behavior so we can have a positive outcome. So thanks again for the time. I don't want to take too much of your time today, but offer a willingness at any point in time. And now with the vaccine and COVID sort of being someplace maybe more confined, we're glad to serve this more in person and have the opportunity to speak with anybody. So thanks again.
Thanks, Karen. Andrew, did you want to add to that or?
No, nothing else for me. But yeah, definitely appreciate the time. And yeah, it's great to see everyone.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else want to address the group prior to us getting going? Okay, thanks. Jay, I'm going to let you grab and run.
All right. Thank you very much, boss. And good morning, everybody. Very appreciated to have so many people joining us this morning in the room and on the call. I won't delay with a lot of words. I'll just go right to introducing our guest of honor this morning. Not to put her in the hot seat, but we're looking forward to this conversation with Elizabeth Walters. She is the Deputy Director of Public Policy at New York Farm Bureau. She's been in that position, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, for 3 years. And prior to that, spent 4 years as the Associate Director of National Affairs with New York Farm Bureau. Previous to that, she was Legislative Director for New York State Senator Elizabeth Little. Has an MBA from the Sages College and a BA from Siena College. Did I get all that right? I went out to your LinkedIn account and stole the information.
Yeah, that's right.
God bless social media. So anyways, Elizabeth, John Wagner told us that you're the person with all the answers as far as what's happening in Albany when it comes to solar policy, especially as it relates to agriculture. Our board of directors has been very interested in having a conversation with you about what you are seeing in Albany in regards to solar policy, how it's going to impact agriculture, and maybe you can give us some ideas, some clues as to what to expect.
Okay, so the state has set a very big goal for solar, 6,000 megawatts by 2025. It's a quick goal. And, we do anticipate, I think over, the next couple of years that goal, if we are hitting the mark, will grow to meet the net zero goals of the state to provide, clean energy moving forward. So a couple of years ago, we've all been talking about solar and agriculture because it is, agricultural land is the perfect place to site solar development. It's flat, it's cleared, it gets good sun exposure. So we've all kind of had this concern about what is going to happen with agricultural land in siting solar. But it wasn't that big of a deal because we didn't have this big goal as a state. And now as we see the goals being set and hard and fast in law, there is a bigger concern about the impacts of agriculture. And in some ways, I feel like we're all a little bit late to the table on this, but I think that there's a lot of good work that is being done and that can be done to help mitigate some of the impacts. If you look at previous solicitations from the state, there isn't much of a mention of agriculture. In the latest RFP that went out, in the permit plan requirements, you now see some guidelines that talks about, mitigating the negative impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems, including agriculture and forestry. And it kind of takes this idea of, you avoid, you minimize, and remediate and offset. So people are starting to talk about, and it is starting to show up in these solicitations, it's showing up in the Office of Renewable Energy siting law, this acknowledgement of the impacts of solar on agricultural lands. So that's a really good, important first step.
Now, I just want to clarify, I should have mentioned it when we got started, that function to submit those, Marshall will monitor that for us. Elizabeth, so you just indicated projects. What are we seeing with the agencies at the state level? Is there any indication of involvement from, for example, New York State Department of Ag and Markets and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation?
Yeah, so it's kind of multifold. So the legislature, it's coming all over the place. So it's definitely hard to describe. But so this year in the state budget, there was a agricultural work group or agricultural land work group set up in law under the Office of Renewable Energy. So the legislature started talking about that. And in that, it named state agencies as part of this working group, including DEC and Ag and Markets. So you have that. Previous to that addition, in the Office of Renewable Energy, there is a list of agencies that need to be consulted in the siting of renewable energy facilities. And that does include NISDAM, Ag Markets, and DEC. So they're included there. There's also a lot of work that goes on, quote unquote, behind the scenes in these solicitations. That is, I think you can see that through the last RFP. That was work done between NYSERDA and Ag and Markets in terms of the mitigation strategy, the avoidance mitigation. That has been NISDAM's approach to solar siting all along. They're very concerned about soils and preserving state soils, and now we see that in the solicitation. So you definitely see the impact and input from the state agencies on these RFPs.
Board members, do you have questions that you would like to ask of Elizabeth?
I have several. New ORES system working process. It seems to me that the regulation, Article 10, have removed most of the local input. I mean, there's, in Article 10, you had 2 local appointees that sat on the board. While they clearly weren't in the majority, you had a voice at that. One of my major concerns is that this is fast track and local input is really going to be meaningless unless you can tell me that's different.
I don't know that we know the answers to that yet because we really haven't seen the process work. There still is consultation with local governments outlined in the law. There is some consideration to local laws and zoning as long as it's not too arduous or broad. So I don't know that we know the answer to that. I've talked to a couple of attorneys that have represented towns in the past, and they kind of have the same position as, we don't know.
Well, that's one of our fears, and I'm one that believes that we should. Our agency, our only role is, do we extend financial benefits in the form of sales tax abatement or tax abatement to the project? Okay, and I don't know how we can sit down and have meaningful discussions about what level of abatement, if any, until we know the outcome of the state's review. And I feel we're going to be under extreme pressures long before that point to negotiate a pilot agreement. And that's one of my concerns. We're here talking about agriculture today, but I have concerns about the impact on non-participating landowners and those type of issues. So that's really where my concern comes, is how do we, when we really have a much lower level of input, get to a comfort level to extend benefits to a project. But today we're talking about agriculture, and some of these projects, clearly are in areas with a large amount of soils of statewide significant and soils and drained soils. So I just am at a loss in how we perceive the large scale projects. The smaller projects we've done have been much easier to get a handle on because they've been through the local zoning process. So I'm just really nervous about what's going to come down from ORES as these projects move through the system.
Elizabeth, have you had the opportunity to see where any other counties have found a way to deal with the agricultural issue of, balancing between protecting the natural resource that is so critical to support agriculture and the opportunity for agriculture to actually develop a revenue stream from solar projects so that they can reinvest? Have you seen anything out there?
So I don't have my eyes out to the counties or towns as much as I do to the state policy. So I don't have a good answer for you on that one.
Okay.
And Elizabeth, when you were saying before about the process involving DEC and ag and markets, is that simply just to clarify, was that simply they have to notify those agencies or actually consult with, or is there a review by those agencies?
There is a review
Okay.
in the process of ORES. Yes, they are. I mean, it's a consultation, but it is a review, and they do weigh in on the projects that they see or deem necessary.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, thank you.
And one thing I failed to mention too is some work that I've been asked to help out with. NYSERDA has these famous twigs. They're technical work groups, and we all kind of affectionately refer to them as twigs. So there is now an A twig And that stands for the Agricultural Technical Work Group. And that is bringing together land conservancies, Farm Bureau, farmers, trying to think who else is on that, representatives of other agricultural organizations like NEDPA and veg growers, all to kind of review these issues and how to set policy, how the state should set policy moving forward. And that process has just begun about a month ago. I think we had our first meeting. And we're going to kind of review and make recommendations going forward on the siting of solar and really renewables on agricultural lands. But you want to talk about it there?
The Tech Hill Commission is also sitting on
Yes.
the A-Twig.
Yep.
Rob?
Yes, thank you. I'm board member Rob Alonso. A question for you. Reading a lot of the reports, and this kind of eventually gets to agricultural, but reading a lot of the reports with the state's lofty goals of its renewable expansion, the North Country, they call it upstate, but North Country is mentioned many times, is cited as a prime location to site a lot of the renewable projects. Okay. And I know there's pockets around the state, the Finger Lakes, Western New York, Adirondack region, et cetera. Seems like downstate is kind of off the table for wealth, political clout, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. We know what goes on in the state. So my question about if upstate New York, predominantly economic development for the North Country, but what's it going to do to Jefferson County? Mr. Hagman would probably like to know, and what's it going to do to the North Country if we take a huge amount of our dollar, eventually 70% abated renewable energy with no jobs? I guess to what end has Ag and Mark looked at?
Has to do with connectivity. And quite frankly, there are projects being cited downstate as well. But the challenge, there's some here in the capital region. The challenge is the land availability. There's a lot of development downstate, making plots of land harder. And honestly, we'll fight, depending on the project. I shouldn't say we fight, but we would have concern with the loss of land downstate in terms of agriculture, because it is definitely a finite commodity and has extreme pressures from development as well. So I don't know that it is fully a political consideration of why or where these projects are being cited. It's just more of a fact of, the North Country, particularly the western side of the Adirondacks, because of the hydro facilities up to the north, western New York, because of the hydro facilities to the west, have the power lines going through, and it happens to be the area where we have some of the best soils in the state because of the geologic history of our state. So it is definitely a concern, and that's why we are engaging on this issue at a multitude of levels. But it also does present opportunities for agriculture too, in terms of leasing rights. And I know, and I turn my nose up sometimes too to the idea of co-location, but the fact of the matter is that there might be some opportunity, and we do see some opportunity. And the cool thing with that is that the state is willing to put some money behind research there too. It was just announced a solicitation with the American Grazing Association to do some work to, look at sheep grazing, look at pollinators, and look at various other agricultural aspects that could coexist. Is there opportunity to grow crops and do other things? We don't know. We need research. And that is something that I think is worthwhile to see if we can have some coexistence, and see if we can get these facilities to reflect the local communities. And in many cases, that is agricultural. So if we can get these facilities to coexist, I think that is the best case scenario.
Okay. I guess a kind of a quasi follow-up to that, and this is discussed at our board too. I mean, there are a lot of large landowners. Some are not necessarily the prime farmlands we're, trying to disincentivize. And those are private rights, and we're, I think, as an agency, generally fine with that. It's really protecting the prime and drain. I forget the other term, drain to prime. Yeah, trying to protect those areas. So if a large landowner has the ability to sacrifice some percentage of their prime lands because they've got so much of it, it really then puts a disadvantage on small and medium farms, the cost of leasing land, which is predominant for Jefferson County. It makes a small and medium farm disadvantaged, and it gives an advantage to a large landowner who can sacrifice. Again, I guess whoever owns the resources controls the cost, supply and demand. So it's another area where, yeah, I hear what you're saying about coexisting, but how is this gonna, happen? As Paul said, the small projects where you're taking, 5 or 20 acres out of circulation. Yeah, incrementally, it's not a big deal on each, but if there's 100 of them, it's probably a big deal. And then we throw another project on top of it. Maybe we're talking about 3 projects at 1,000 acres each. Jefferson County is going to see some serious impacts, and it's honestly still a concern for me.
So on the small community solar aspect, I don't like to dismiss those because a lot of those happen close to communities and where farmland is rare. And an impact of losing one of those farms can be huge because that is our connection to a lot of our communities, right? From an agricultural perspective. So community and small scale solar is also a concern and maybe shouldn't be outright dismissed. On the rented farmland, that is definitely a concern for us because that takes the decision away from the farmer. And that can have a really big impact. And large farms lease land, small farms lease land, everybody, it isn't unique just to a small or medium-sized farm. There are some very, very large farms that lease a portion of their land. So that is definitely a concern, particularly when you're dealing with animal agriculture and there are, laws and regulations about spreading and the availability of land. I had another point on your comment. And I think soils are really important, and this has been kind of the challenge that I've had in terms of how to get good policy. These projects are so site specific in terms of impact. It is really hard to do a statewide policy on this issue because, there are different soils, there are different developers, there are different farmers, there are multiple landowners. And I think when you have a farm that's a willing participant, or multiple farms that are willing participants, it's really good for the farmer to understand that they should be working with the developer to minimize the use of, their prime land, particularly if they're going to continue to farm, and how we educate farmers and give them the tools that they need in order to negotiate that. The farmer has a little bit of an upper hand because they have the land, a little bit, because there is more land and developers can go somewhere else. But, it is really important that farmers, seek counsel and work to minimize the impact on their business and have to start those conversations from the beginning.
Yeah. Where we started, I think initially our board started with trying to put X's on a map and say, please build here. So our original plan was to, within the county, try to control the areas that we would incentivize development. And what it turned out was the development is so far ahead of us, 2 and 3 years ahead of our discussions and our awareness, that now we're looking at it, and I hate the negative connotation of disincentivize it, building on where we don't have an max. And it really, that's where it's come to, and it should be a positive discussion, and it's become a negative discussion for both the developer and the county involved persons. So trying to get it back to that positive discussion of, and I like what, Darren and Andrew said, I mean, engaging the community, they're here, they're baked in, whether they live here or not. If they invest in Jefferson County, great, good for you. But there's still a cost and benefit analysis. It's gotta be something that's good for the public whole. You can't take a gold mine, put water in it and say it's a swimming pool, and it's better for the public to be a swimming pool than a gold mine. And I look at our land as gold mine. So we can't just populate it with something that's not a farm anymore, or a very inefficient farm. So I kind of just leave with that. I'm done talking because I could talk all day on this crowd. Worse than you, Jay.
Rob, this is Ed. Let me help you out. I think I can help you out a little bit with that, getting your hands around that. And first of all, I think it's trying to determine risk versus benefits. I think we need to deal with some reality here. And the reality is this, cold hard fact. There is not going to be any agricultural endeavor that land can support and generate $1,000 a year net profit on. That's what it's going to generate under a solar panel. Now, whether it's $800, $850, or $1,000, that's kind of where it's falling in. So solar panel siting on farmland in upstate New York is a revenue generator. Make no bones about it. And then the tax advantages, the tax revenue stream is significant. And here comes the host community agreements, which is another whole level of public support, public benefit. So there are real significant contributions being made by renewable energies into local economies, no question about it. How much of it can you support before you start to create a detriment to the other industry, production agriculture? Where does that number fall? I would say you start doing some studies, but I would predict it's probably going to fall in maybe 25% to 30%. So what I'm saying is, I think you could readily take 30% of what would be considered not prime farmland, but usable, maybe marginal farmland. Could be a candidate. That's the pool of acreage that can be a candidate for, solar development sightings. Can we accommodate? Could the North Country, could Jefferson County, could 5-county region support taking a third of its semi-productive farmland out of production and put it under renewable energy? I think it could. I will say this though, we're concerned about prime farmland. The issue that's going to rear its ugly head is going to be not the prime farmland, but the more usable, somewhat marginal farmland. Because that block of land is of far more significance than what little bit of acreage we may lose under what would be considered prime farmland. So yes, I think the prime farmlands will end up protecting themselves under public pressure, but still, if we make some allowances for maybe, a landowner to take 20% of the project, if it were prime farmland and include it without detriment, I think most of those projects can shift themselves around a little bit and will be in compliance. So it really comes back to that bigger pool of land, which is the grazeland, the grasslands capability of upstate New York. And that is where those large farms are completely dependent on a lot of that rented acreage. And you're going to start to hear it from them that they're losing their natural resources for a support base because they need that grassland. So I just put that word of caution out there, but I think we can accommodate it if we go about it right. And at the end of the day, we have very limited tools to use to stop this from moving forward. No different than developmental properties. You know, downstate. Agriculture is still going out of production. Farms are going out of production every year to the bulldozer, to the building lot, to subdivision every day. So you can't stop that. It hasn't been stopped. It's been minimized to some degree through land trust or whatever. And I don't think you're gonna stop it with solar either.
I told her 45 to 60.
Because we don't have the tools to do it, you know? It's profitability and landowner rights that are going to, at the end of the day, I think, rule out.
Thanks, Ed.
Does that help you at all, Rob, or does that?
No, it's fine. It's a different perspective. I mean, I understand that the landowner would make more money not being a farmer, is what I heard. And they might coexist with the developer to lease rights for some other use, and that's fine. It doesn't help me with the tax. It doesn't help me with the tax abatement side. So I kind of then let's tax these like you would a farm is kind of what my simple solution is, and we don't offer tax abatement. That's my simple solution, but it's not what you meant.
Our only tool is the incentives we could provide. That is our only tool to drive it. I mean, one of my concerns is that the general municipal law requires us to ensure that these projects comply with local law, local master plans and zoning. So the ORS system has the right to override local zoning. But then the question will come is, if they've overridden local zoning as being too stringent, are we prohibited from extending benefits? I know Katie's organization has helped several towns, and I think they're working with Watertown, possibly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, on their solar law, so.
Yeah, we did. We just actually, Town of Watertown has adopted their revised regulations to deal with solar. So, and we think that we did a fairly good job balancing the various, I see Derek smiling, the various stakeholder groups that were very participatory in that process. The other thing, I think you did make a good point, Paul, about the ORS regulations, and until we understand how the local zoning laws or local standalone solar laws are going to be, kind of taken into account in that process, we are kind of shooting in the dark. I just looked at their website because I know there's a lot of projects in Article 10 converting it to the 94C right now. There's 3 projects in there that look like they're a little bit farther along, and frankly, I haven't looked at them, but Heritage Wind, Morris Ridge Solar, Riverhead Solar 2, and there are draft permit documents that ORS has put together in the documentation for those projects, and there's for example, some town zoning laws or standalone laws in that. So I actually just printed a few out, and I'm going to try to take a look at those over the next few days to see what that draft permit says and how it relates to what the towns have on their books.
One of the things that we keep hearing, both, from the work with the HVIC and some others, is the importance of having a good local law. If you're setting out to stop solar development, I think that you're going to run into some hurdles when it comes to ORES. But if you're setting out to do good zoning, I don't think you're going to hit that problem. I can't guarantee that. I don't know that for a fact. But, all state agencies keep mentioning, the work that is being done on the draft or model law, and we're reviewing that as part of the HWIC too, to see if that can be strengthened on the agricultural side. So that's really important going forward. And I really do. I mean, we're all kind of behind the game with this, but I think it's really important for local communities to look at this and make sure that their zoning laws are the way that they should be in order to steer development the way that the locality wants it to be. If it's for not, it's for, I don't think it is for not, even if even if ORES doesn't take everything into account, I think it really is important to take that step and to look at, your community and be prepared.
So Jay and I have had several discussions on the postage stamp impact of these smaller projects, and you mentioned them briefly. Do you think we should be taking a harder look or suggesting that the communities take a harder look at these small 25-acre projects? Should we be considering in our review before extending benefits, have they taken into account the impact on their local agricultural base?
I mean, any project that comes to your community, you should look at, the impacts. Is it going to be sited in an area that already has really fragmented agricultural lands? Like, what is the significance of that farm? Or that land? Is it being farmed? Is it not? I mean, I think that's just, good public policy to review everything, but I don't know. I mean, every community should be prepared.
But I'm saying, we're talking as this agency that when we see one of these projects, they have their permits in hand from the local zoning.
It's really, Paul, it's really a planning board function to look at all of those impacts. And you said it yourself, all we're supposed to do, does it meet general municipal law, I think it's 832, did it comply with local zoning, and can we extend benefits because of the cost of benefits? So we're kind of very narrow focus with looking at each of these projects. And I'll be honest, a lot of our planning boards probably aren't equipped to look at a lot of these costs or benefits and how it fits with surrounding communities. Because, we're talking about the North Country as a total. I forget how many towns we have, but if you do more development in Ellisburg, how does it affect the town of Henderson? As an example, they're closely connected communities, very agrarian based, and there's other coexisting communities. And again, we started out with simply through Jay's group to try to put X's on a map using Jay as the ag coordinator for the county. Where is the best place? Knowing he can control, take a wider prism look at the county as a whole versus just as a town.
I would like to make a comment here as well. This solar, I think, is like the first step for New York State to displace, fossil fuel type generation and stuff, but also, they've also enacted just recently in New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, where, they want businesses to, really assess their process and, really have some sort of documentation why they're supporting, why that person would be supporting using a fossil fuel fired piece of equipment versus an electric. And I don't know where they're going with all this or how they're gonna police it down the road, but this is just getting implemented now. And again, their objective is to move everything towards electric. Whether it's you have a gas-fired boiler, they want you to go to electric boiler. Whether you have a gas-fired drying system, they want you to go to electric. So this solar thing is just the beginning of where New York State wants to go with this whole electric side of the equation here. So, we're kidding ourselves if we thinking that's going to go away or we're going to try and divert it somewhere. Somehow, the way the direction New York State is going, they want everything electric, and they're pushing not only the solar project, but they're pushing businesses to go in that direction. And you've got to have a supporting document and why you would go otherwise in your business. So, as he said, 6,000 megawatt is the goal for 2025. Do we have a feel of where that stands at this point on the projects that have been developed?
Elizabeth, any?
I don't know where they are in terms of permitted or, through the process at this point.
I'm just doing the quick math, my own math of 28 acres per 5 megawatt. You're talking almost 34,000 acres of land on 6,000 megawatt. Well, you're talking almost 34,000 acres of land at 6,000 megawatt. So I'm just wondering where we stood today.
The estimate for the 6,000 is anywhere between 36 to 60,000 acres, but that is changing. As technology advances with solar development, it is, the impact is getting smaller. And it's cheaper, and the rate at which it is moving is astounding.
And I just looked on NYSERDA's website, and just to answer the question that was asked, right now, as of the end of March of 2021, it looks like there's 3,000 megawatts of solar installed.
Halfway there.
Yeah. So coming back,
Ed, can I just have one quick?
Ed, Rob was trying to get a question before you, sir.
One quick follow-up. The 6,000 was only for solar, and there's some other allotment for onshore wind as well?
Yeah, and all that was part of the CLCPA package, and just on that, the Climate Action Council, I was on the Agricultural and Forestry Advisory Panel, and I think Darren was on the electric generation one as well. So what the process is at this point is they are developing recommendations, these advisory panels, and they have presented them to the full Climate Action Council. And what they're going to do is a scoping plan on how each industry in the economy is going to help meet these goals. And when it comes to agriculture, the really cool thing is that we have a positive impact on climate. Sorry, reading the comment from Darren. But so we have the ability to mitigate more than we produce. And all the recommendations that have been put forth by the Agriculture and Forestry Panel are, voluntary incentive-based actions that farmers can make to help mitigate, as well as, incentives for, capping and flaring and digestion and that type of thing.
Darren,
We're
did
not
you?
where the CLCPA is at this point in terms of what is going to be asked of each industry.
Darren, did you want to clear up some information?
Yeah, just quickly, first off, really appreciate this interesting conversation. So, and I don't want to interject, but the 6,000 megawatts, just to clear up, so there is a goal in the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act, which is the law we talked about, that sort of establishes the goals. There's a 6,000 megawatt goal, but that's for DG, so it's basically distributed generation. So that's only the smaller type. To get to the 70%, there is not a specific goal for a particular type of generation. So it could be any type of renewable generation. It could be basically state 70%. Just so that that's out there, I think it's important. As you sort of look at, as you sort of look at what the scope of what this is, it's a little bit bigger. And I don't want to be.
Isn't the state's goal not necessarily 70% renewable, but low carbon generation? So small modular, nuclear, and things of that nature, high efficient, low carbon come into play? Or does it say 70% renewable?
Great question. Actually, it says 70% renewable.
Okay, I haven't read it in a while, but yeah, I thought it did.
But you were right, there's another part of it. So there's 70% by 2030. And I was on the power generation side. Got it together and put together like how we're going to get there, which is a conversation for another day. But there is a portion of that which then the next part of that goal is 100% zero emitting by 2040, and that would allow them to do it. So
That's the second part, because a couple companies in the U.S. have developed some good technology. Canada, it's getting tested out, and it certainly will help achieve the state's goals and the country's goals for low emission or no emission.
redefined renewable in that space too. So they took out, and this is important, they took out actually some of the things that would have helped out the ag community in a biofuel manner. So
You know, one thing that is completely lacking from the conversation and it frustrates me, you know, agricultural land. But first of all, coming back to that 30,000 to 50,000 acres to hit the 6,000 goal, what are there, 52 counties, New York State? Let's say 50 counties in New York State. So if every county would technically, theoretically need to allocate 1,000 acres of land to accommodate that goal, then they'd hit it. So the point I'm making is to reinforce the fact that there's no reason why we can't accommodate both scenarios here very easily, I think. But here's the thing that's been lacking from the conversation that frustrates me. We wouldn't have to take any agricultural land out of production. We could still hit the state's allocated 6,000 goal for renewable. And if we would just utilize the rooftop sightings we have now, the rooftop capability of putting solar on industrial sites around the state, flat roofs, you could easily accommodate that 1,000 acres of square footage on rooftop buildings now, and it would be where the power needs to go. It would be local, and you'd never have to put an acre of agricultural land under solar panels. That's my frustration. Sometime we ought to start to tilt the conversation toward, you know, why take it prime agricultural land? The rooftop installation, cost-wise, isn't that much more expensive than land installation. But yet it's completely lacking from the conversation. That frustrates me. But I just would like to conclude with, I think you can handle it both. That's not too lofty of a goal to accommodate. It's one I think people could get excited about. It's an economic generator and it creates some tax revenues for communities and it doesn't adversely affect any major agricultural production sector.
Yeah.
I think the challenge there, Ed, is whether the structures can support that sort of stuff on the roof without major renovation. I mean, that's probably the biggest issue with the storage in the area. Stuff like that.
Greg?
Well, I'm putting a 35 kW system on my roof, and the typical installation is they figure 4 pounds of snow load. So if we're building structures for whatever it is today, the code for 45 pound snow load, the solar panels on there is going to take you to a 40 pound snow load.
And NYSERDA through the New York Sun program has resources for residences, businesses, and municipalities to set up, laws and stuff around that. So it is something that, is out there and ability, and there are financial incentives and stuff if you look at NYSERDA site.
One last question.
No.
I'm sorry. Greg, did you want to ask something? My last question would be, what role do you see for our local Ag and Farmland Protection Board to play in the siting process through ORES?
I mean, as part of the local hearing process, and they should be involved in discussions.
Okay.
Greg Gardner, did you have a question?
I think he froze.
Yeah, he's back now. Greg, did you have a question? And he froze up again. Any other board members have questions for Elizabeth?
Yeah, it's been very productive, both from Boralex's introduction and then also from our state and county agencies. This has been great.
Okay. All right, I was just trying to give Greg a chance to log back in. Greg, can you?
Yeah, I can. I'm gonna turn my video off just to, it seems to help. But it was, do we have any studies? Does anybody have an awareness? I guess if Elizabeth is still on.
She is.
Okay, we're talking about essentially economic impact of solar versus farming, and we're, I think Ed summed it up really well in terms of farming seems to be, in many cases, a low marginal return per acre, and so as a result, nobody grows corn in Lower Manhattan. But we're worried about externalities, secondary knock-on effects. What happens to other industries when we start building solar arrays on farmland? Has anybody ever seen studies? Have we looked at those impacts? Because I get the impression we're sort of flailing in the dark in terms of what the real economic impact is.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
You haven't seen anything, Elizabeth?
No, I can see if I can find some research on that. Not something I thought about before this meeting.
Okay. And, we can certainly take a look at that as well, Greg. Greg, would you mind sending that to me as an email?
Yeah.
I'd appreciate that, and then I can go from there.
Okay.
All right, so any final questions for Elizabeth?
Thank you very much.
And Elizabeth?
I dropped in the chat function the programs and for the rooftop installations through NYSERDA, and then also the local solar energy law resource as well.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, you're welcome to stay where I'm about to present our disincentive model to the board. Everybody is welcome to stay on and hear that presentation. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, Rob. So you're welcome to stay on. And thank you very much. We really appreciate New York Farm Bureau and Jefferson County Farm Bureau, the work that you're doing to be the voice of agriculture here locally and in New York. I encourage everybody to go to www.nyfb.org and become a member of Farm Bureau. They are a member-driven organization. Are you proud of me, Adam? I included that in the conversation.
Very proud of you, Jay. I'm currently putting a link in the chat. By the end of the day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Marshall, if you don't mind, would you bring up the slides that we have? Bear with us, folks. We're bringing up the slide presentation. And I did email this out to board members. The latest edition came late yesterday afternoon. So you should have it in your email boxes. After today, I'd be happy to email this to anybody that wants to see the actual slides. I'm just waiting here.
Hold on a second, Bill. Just wanna, can you guys see this okay? Let me just.
Can everybody see the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, we should be okay.
All right, so is it working?
Why is this one doing that?
I don't know.
You gotta open it twice. Can I put that at the bottom?
Can you go, Marshall,
Yeah.
can you click on from the beginning over there to the left? There you go. Perfect. All right. So this is an informational piece at this point for our board of directors to consider a possible way to discourage solar development on our prime and prime if drained soils. What you looking for, boss? Oh, yeah, okay, perfect. All right. So just to put things into perspective, so that we have a beginning point at what we're looking at. Jefferson County, a total of 800, just over 800,000 acres. According to the last Census of Agriculture, we have 247,000 acres in farms. Now that land is not all active agricultural cropland. That land is a whole lot of things. So I encourage you not to think about that as what is active agriculture. Of that total, 232,000 are listed as acres of prime and primed if drained soils, or excuse me, of the total number of acres in Jefferson County, the total acreage for Jefferson County, 232,000, 29%, is classified as prime and prime if drained soils by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Now, a lot of that land is not available to agriculture. It might be under forests, a lot of different uses going on of that total there.
Right, that number is not all in the 247.
Right. So let's then take a look at those last two bullet points. These are the important ones. We utilize the land that is in New York State certified ag districts. We use that as an indication of what is active agricultural land. This is where farms or landowners have gone through the process of signing their land up in the certified ag district program. So that's an indication to us, and it's really the only way we have of coming up of some accurate figure of what is in active agriculture. So 30% of the county is in certified ag districts. Of that land, approximately 32% of that ag district land, 77,000 acres, is classified as that prime or primed if drained soils. Now we are focusing on those two classifications alone in our information we're providing, because that is the best soils available to farms to grow crops on. That is what is considered the best across the state for farms to use to grow their crops. There's certainly a lot more land you can grow crops on, but these are the best. And in listening to the community, this is what we have heard is the concern. How much of that 77,000 acres, the land that is classified as prime or prime if drained in ag districts, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're focusing on. So with the disincentive model, there's some important definitions. I've already talked about prime farmlands, the two classifications of soils. There is another classification of soils, soils of statewide importance. Those are classified by New York State Department of Ag and Markets. That would basically double or triple. If you added that onto the prime farmland soils or prime if drained, that would double or triple the number of acres of soils that we would look at. But we are, based on public comment, based on what are the best soils, we're looking at the prime and prime if drained. You've got somebody trying to get in, Marshall. So, and then active farmland. we use the ag districts as a general indication of what is active when we look at the county as a whole. For this model, for the examples that we would use, if this was ever to be adopted by the board of directors, we would actually look at this on a project basis. Was that land for that particular project in active crop production, including pasture, over the last 3 years? And that's generally what we do when we go out and do road reviews of land that's been submitted for ag districts. We go out and we take a road survey to try and find out, has that land been used for active agriculture over the last 3 years? So that is what we would use on a per project basis with this model. Then another important definition is that what is the solar project? And you can see there, we are saying the solar project is the area of land within constructed, artificial, or planted barriers, visual barriers, the access roads that would exist from public highways to the actual solar array, and other structures that support that solar array, the poles, transformers, anything that impacts the ground underneath it. And of course, the solar array itself. So that would be what we would consider the solar project. So this disincentive model applies to, and we talked about this earlier with Elizabeth, this applies to all solar projects. I had suggested to the board of directors previously that I would be just as concerned as agricultural coordinator. I would be just as concerned about the community solar projects and their impact on prime farmland and disrupting the agricultural pattern around it, as I would be the industrial projects. Certainly the industrial projects take up more land area, but when you put together the cumulative effect of those community solar projects, that can be just as impactful as a bigger industrial project. So that's the recommendation that is there. All solar projects seeking JCIDA assistance. Again, applies to only prime and prime drained soils. And as we just defined, the area of land within a solar project. So continuing on, what we are trying to do with the disincentive model is to increase the pilot base price per megawatt to discourage a solar company from building their solar project on prime and prime drained soils. That's what the purpose of this is. And it's based on a similar model that Lewis County IDA looked at that provided incentives. It's their good work that they did that we are building upon with this model. All right, so we're about to take a look at an example, and it's actually the same exact example that Lewis County uses for their efforts. We are going to look at, in our case, we're going to look at either a 30 or 50% increase over that base megawatt pilot payment that the solar developer would pay. All other soils within that project would remain at that base payment price. We would only be increasing the price for prime if drained and prime soils. That base pilot price is $5,500 a megawatt. Now that's not set in stone, right, Dave?
Right. I mean, that's what we're using now.
That's what we're using now. So that would be the price that we would start with. Within this solar project example, the one we're about to look at, when you take a look at the number of acres of soil within the project, you'd find that 12.5% are prime, 39.9 are prime if drained. Soils of statewide importance would be 35.6. And then soils not classified would be 12.1 for the purpose of this example only. So taking a look at a 30% increase. Again, we start with that $5,500 pilot base payment. We have to convert that into a value per acre, all right? So using those percentages, prime farmland, 12.5% of the project's prime farmland, converting that into a per acre price, you come out with just over $687. Prime if drained comes out at just over $2,000. Statewide importance, again, we're not going to increase that price, but it stays right now at $1,958, and they're not classified as $665. Now we apply our 30% increase to that base price. With that 30% increase, when you go through the calculation of that, you take your base price, you find out what the increase would be, you add that increase to the base price. In the end, the prime farmland per acre would be $893.75. Prime if drained, $2,852.85. And remember, statewide importance and not classified does not receive an increase. It remains at that base price per acre. So when you add all of that up, the increased pilot payment then converts back to that $6,370.10 per megawatt. And you can see what the increase is over that base megawatt price. So what we have done is applied a disincentive prime if drained soils. That's with a 30% increase. When we look at a 50% increase, I won't go through everything. With a 50% increase, you can see the pilot payment was increased to $6,946 per megawatt. And the amount of increase that is over the base megawatt price. So it again applies a disincentive to use those prime soils. Any questions?
Jay, so at the 50% increase in valuation, would that not be putting you at 100% full assessment over the period? You know, the 50 normal pilots 50% over 15 or 20-year period. So at 50%, does that put them at? I know you increased them 30%, but theoretically at 50%, does that make them 100% tax full value?
Well, that would only be the case if the entire plot of land was prime or prime if drained.
Right.
Well,
at 50% on the prime farmland, that still puts them at that small acreage still puts that at 100% taxation, right?
I don't know. I don't know.
Hang on just a second, Ed.
No, I have to calculate it. It's moving it up close to that.
It's close, but it would only affect it if the entire thing was in prime or prime if drained classification.
Right, I realize. Yeah, I realize that. Yep.
Yeah, so you're approaching it. You're not there yet, but you are approaching it.
All right, that answers my question. Yep.
Ed, when we looked at these in loan review and other things, full taxation is closer to 12 or 13,000 a megawatt anyway. So like any of these projects, regardless of what land they're on, you know, as you recall, we're not really at 50% abatement anyway. We're higher for various reasons. I mean, Paul can correct me, but I think it's 12.5 to 13,000 per megawatt is actually 100% taxation based on the small scale community 5 megawatt and an actual appraisal that's now 3 years old.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful.
Disincentive model. This is a community project here in Jefferson County, 20 megawatt project. You can see the base price 5,500. The total yearly pilot payment would be 110,000. Then you apply the 50% disincentive model. Now this figure, that 414 acres, that's looking at the parcel. Obviously, a 20 megawatt project is not, I don't think it's going to take up all 414 acres. But that's all we had to look at as the example right now. We do not have the actual project acreage, available to us for that project. So when you apply the 50% disincentive, instead of $110,000 per year, it raises the yearly pilot payment up to $131,450 per year. So that's just an actual example from Jefferson County. Again, looking at the parcel, not the actual project footprint. So just wanted to provide you an example from Jefferson County. So to summarize what we're trying to do, we're trying to encourage solar developers to not put their projects on prime or prime if drained soils. That's what we're trying to encourage them to avoid. We're trying to find a balance between the public interest of discouraging solar development on those prime farm soils and the farm's interest, the landowner's interest in developing additional revenue streams to invest in their farm operations. Somewhere there's a very fine line between the two, and that's what we're trying to find. Whether this hits the mark, that's a decision for the board. But this is something that we think needs to be considered as that possible way of achieving our goals. Can you take us out, please? So we're gonna stop the share and try to answer questions if at all possible. Any questions on that?
I just say thanks for all you did on this, Jay. I appreciate it. I think it's important that our guests realize that we're in the middle of discussing revising our UTEP at this point in time. But I wanted to say that I don't know how many people on the board read Justin's email from last night. I think we need to have Justin come in sometime and talk about his experience in the other counties he represents, because that was an interesting email on how they handle things in Wayne County. And tying that to what Dave suggested in his email yesterday. So, but this will work great if we have new developers come into town. The issue now is we have 4 or 5 large-scale, utility-scale projects that are already going through the siting process. So it's really more, not so much as a disincentive because they're not going to move their project as it is a different way to calculate what the pilot would be. Or am I missing something, Jay?
That would be up to the solar developer. You're probably right, Paul. Probably the projects that have been proposed, I don't know if they're going to move their project because of this. But the proof will be in the pudding as to what their reaction is.
I think a couple things too. I mean, at this point, we don't, our UTEP doesn't apply to large scale projects, so there's been nothing threatened or promised at this point in time. The percentages we were just using that Jay illustrated, again, the board, if they decide to take that approach, you might choose slightly different percentages. That's all. I mean, these are just kind of give you an example of the scale of what that impact of that calculation could be. So as Paul said,
For clarity for our guest, Justin Paul references our board's counsel, Justin Miller of Harris Beach, in case anybody didn't know who Justin was.
Are there any other questions on what we just presented?
Is well presented, as I indicated, it gets us closer to actually 50% abatement, which has kind of been our goal. We've been abating anywhere between 65 and 55% on every single project, just because of how the numbers worked out. Because we went down a path of choosing $1 per megawatt versus actually calculating actual taxes. But this definitely gets us closer. My only comment I made earlier, I hate the term disincentive. I know that's what it does, but it's the negative connotation of what we're trying to do. If there was a different way of agricultural compatibility model, whatever, Greg Gardner will come up with something.
Well, you could still call it an incentive if you want. The incentive is we avoid prime farmland and we pay less. But the difference is that we're not deducting from the base, which seems to be a pretty acceptable base rate across the state right now. The companies are willingly paying.
No, I'm only making, I understand, I'm only making light of the matter, but somebody that's looking at Jefferson County to do development, I don't want them reading the Appendix A that says disincentive model. I don't think that's good for putting on our shingle.
No. It would just say this is the rate.
You just frame it as location assistance.
Call it Bob Hageman's retirement fund. I don't care. We gotta call it something.
Bob, are we missing something? I just want to remind everyone that when we start talking about what is full taxation, that may very well change as the new regulations and appraisal methodology is established by the state. So while we talk about, if you look at the appraisals we had done by John Zukowski, and we extend those out into what full taxation would be based upon that appraisal, if the methodology is manipulated by the state, that could push that number down. So,
well, depending on how long it takes that for the state guidelines to be effective, we may establish something in interim, and we may have to adjust it later when those things get finalized.
the state has 180 days to provide that methodology, which the ORES is going to take years. So we should have time to get a handle on that before any of these projects get to the point of finalized.
Anything else? Let's see, we lost John Jennings, and we lost our chairman, Dave Converse. My understanding is Bill Johnson is at the helm now.
I guess.
Jake?
Whoop.
I wonder if Boralex.
Whoop, hang on, Bill.
Folks in Boralex have a perspective or a few comments on this.
Oh, and one question before that, just for the sake of the minutes, someone that logged on late, iPhone or on, just identify yourself.
Probably Ross.
Ron Robbins.
Who?
Ron
Robbins.
Oh, okay. Right.
Kind of assuming that.
Thanks. All right. Okay, go ahead.
And Bill, Rob.
Which will basically reflect what you're interested in that time, because they've spent the time to basically do develop the due diligence, to do the research, to identify where the wetlands are, to identify where they are, to identify what other concerns that there are, able to sort of make those changes and pivots in that way. And I knew that there was about dual use and about sort of what this looks like, and I don't want to dismiss it. But I think when we sort of look at what Watertown, the town of Watertown, the input from the Tug Hill, for their own evaluation, one of the things they did evaluate, which is, they wanted to put a protection in there for farm storage. But they also valued basically structural changes that the developer would put in place to ensure that there could be continued farm operations. And I know it's sort of questionable because people sort of haven't seen what we're talking about, which are the single axis tracking units, which have larger spaces between the panels. And we as developers can actually make that happen, which means we can grow crops in that space. If you look at sort of what crops the county's growing a lot of this year, would be there's a way to sort of address that part. So you're still, you're not incentivizing. I don't think you should give people a free ride, that was sort of in the last 2.5 years, but encourage them to sort of take actions they can actually add to the ag community and do it in a positive way. Tug Hill sort of helped the town of Watertown come up with, some way to do it in that space. We're glad to have a conversation with you about sort of how something like that can work and how we can sort of see that integrate.
So one question I have, having heard that, would be this simply: would you say that would open the door, perhaps, to as a solution to opening the door to provide a solution to that scenario of the prime farmland, is to just pay the additional tax appropriation because of things that were kind of a thing? Does it open the door for that? Is that an option? Is that a viable option coming from a developer?
Yeah, and I think some developers will choose to go a path of sort of this resistance, and they'll make a purely economic choice, and come in and basically say, okay, this is something we can capitalize on our project, or we can sort of put it into the project and we can go forward. And they're going to be looking at the entire economics of that. Perhaps the biggest thing is the assessment value. So the assessed value, as Paul had indicated, that we're seeing is, we saw basically the state take the step to require the tax department come up with a standardization, in part to address the uncertainty associated with the assessed value of the project. And the biggest thing from the developer is actually determining what that assessed value is. Once that gets set, then that sort of pegs everything else and sort of everything flows from it. But to answer your question, some developers will choose to sort of go down that path. I think you have to think about what happens if you do that. So like from a town perspective, we sort of know how the tax system works with a tax cap. Essentially, if you get additional pilot money, there is a small, obviously you're reducing the amount that the town has to collect from the current taxpayers by a de minimis amount. But it's sort of not, it's not really having a significant impact on that community that's sort of there. And, it's maybe there's that sort of, I guess why I sort of struggle with it too. It's sort of like, well, there's definitely an impact, which will change people's behavior. But will it sort of go to ameliorate or to address the underlying issues and concerns in a form of basically mitigation? And it sort of probably doesn't. Really what it does is just sort of spreads around the wealth in the town in a very sort of different way. And sort of I think of it as a potential lost opportunity about how do we look at what the IDA has done. The IDA, this one in particular, has committed itself to agriculture in a manner which others don't, as focused in on both all aspects of the supply chain in a manner that others haven't. And it's sort of like, is there a way to sort of, if there is a penalty, to make sure those resources are going to ways and sort of help to advance the ag ecosystem that sort of allows for continued growth in the ag part. So We're mitigating that mitigation sheet. Things that are actually. So I throw those ideas out there, not as Kronos as an opportunity to engage in discussion. We're from our standpoint, our developer standpoint, we want to, you're sending a clear signal to us as developers what the community values. And as such, we're trying to basically adjust our project in ways to meet those values. And that's, I think, the most impactful aspect of this is a clear conversation about sort of how important that integration is. And that's why we do think dual use is part of it, because it actually supports the other parts of the agricultural community that are there. So it's the feed dealer, it's the tractor supplier, it's the others. So we can keep some of that farmland still in production. We'll actually keep all of those support elements in that process.
Okay, probably also, something to reflect on what Darren suggested, gave an additional thought to the model that you just presented. If our true intention is to keep farmland productive, and our assumption was in the model that the farmland became unproductive, would it not also be wise for us to consider that if we took 1,000 acres out of circulation, but maybe 300 of it stayed productive, to somehow look at, say 1,000 acres had a production value of X, and after industrialization, it has a production value of Y. Could that Y factor not be, not as a question why, but the letter, could the Y be somehow a credit to the disincentive? And you don't have to answer it, but it's a thought process. I mean, if our goal is to keep cropland productive and it can remain some fractional production, it's something we should consider. And it's a good point that Darren's made. If technology evolves where you can be 100% productive and use it for other uses, great, that's fantastic. It's just a thought.
No, it's
well, and one thing I'll throw out, Rob, along those lines, and I think it comes back to the phrase and grasslands. You know, the majority of the land that's probably going to fall under solar panels would be in the category of, you know, what we call grasslands. And what do you do with grasslands? You know, animals graze on it. So there's opportunity to keep those lands as grasslands under solar panels, more so than row crop production. So, you know, it can be a fit. It can be a fit under certain scenarios and stay productive as grasslands.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rob, that we can certainly look at that. You know, we have talked in board meetings and outside of board meetings about the possibility of, you know, different types of agriculture being used underneath those solar panels. Certainly the value to, if the existing use of that agricultural land is for dairy production to grow the crops to feed our livestock, that value is going to probably decrease for that land under solar panels. But it could be used, for example, as Ed just alluded to, and Ron had alluded to at our last gathering on this issue. It could be used for grazing other livestock. I'm not aware you're going to graze, beef cattle or bison under solar panels, but you might be able to graze sheep or something else, a smaller scale livestock. So there is other potential use. Can we factor that into what we're trying to do? Potentially, I want to talk more closely with Darren and Andrew to see what they're talking about, to learn what they're talking about, what they feel they can adjust those panels to do.
And I know this is not a one-size-fit-all model because, you know, lands have to be rotated for different uses. very frequently, well, not as frequently, but it's a thought. And if you start out with what you presented as this is the base, but if there could be some proof that there was some other production use that supports agricultural, I just think we should, as a board, potentially consider that as a credit towards the surplus or surcharge that we're adding to prevent total loss of the farmlands. So it both could potentially work. You know, if we're saying solar and farmland could work together, I think we can also maybe work the surcharge and credit idea together.
And we could certainly take a look at that. Anything else? Mr. Chairman, Bill Johnson, anything else, sir?
Nope, I think it's been a great conversation, and I guess if there is no more comments, it's probably about time to call it quits.
Would move we adjourn if there's no more comments.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Be safe.
Good day.
Thank you.